Johnbonne had been nagging me all week to find the game, and if I didn't find it now, it'd go nuttier than squirrel poop. Where the hell would he keep this thing? Oh my god! He's still into Skylanders! Point-and-click games were a huge thing in the 90s, and the adventure genre was dominant at the time. Anything that involved mysteries, from dark caves filled with endless riches to serial murders by malevolent forces, always attracted gamers during the boom. I always like to think there were two kinds of adventure game, the detective style such as Sam & Max, and the action-adventure style in the form of Tomb Raider. You could either be a sly and cunning take of Poirot, or you could be a daredevil and explore decrepit tombs like Indiana Jones. Either way, you can tell why adventure games were kick-ass. The problem with adventure games was that during their prime, they were all very similar. A few examples of adventure game were Carmen Sandiego, Sam & Max, and the Monkey Island franchise. But there was one game in particular that had an impact on the genre, and that was Broken Sword. I found this game when I first got into PS1 reviewing properly, and it came with a bundle of discs. I tried it and I couldn't get into it very easily, but once I started making progress, it was a game I'd wanted to review ever since I'd played it. I hit a few snags though. The first problem I faced was that the game hadn't been looked after much by the original owner, so it was scratched pretty badly. Since I wanted to review it, I've had a tough time finding a replacement copy. I've already bought 3 discs hoping they were in playable condition, but they often froze. So now I finally got a working copy in its original case, but without an instruction manual, the latter being the most important part. The first time playing Broken Sword, I had a lot of trouble understanding the gameplay because I had no instruction manual and the helping game was minimal. Trying to play this game without a manual is like trying to navigate a minefield blindfolded. You'll not die, you'll just be too scared to move anywhere. In many point-and-click games, it's hard to know what you're doing early on, but Broken Sword makes it fairly easy for you to get comfortable right away. The story of Broken Sword is that you play as a man named George Stobbart, who is touring Europe and finds himself in Paris. When a clown blows up the cafe he's sitting outside of and is nearly killed, it's up to him and the people he meets to solve the case of the assassination attempt. What starts out as a murder mystery slowly unravels into a conspiracy involving the Knights Templar, supernatural forces, and endless treasures. It's like the perfect blend of the two adventure genres I know. Right from the start, you know this is a game that has minimal backtracking and padding, and every clue you find and every plot twist you discover keeps you interested. Seconds after the credits at the beginning of the game, you're thrown into harm's way and begin your search for the mysterious assassin. But first, you have to figure out the controls, and by God are they crippled. The first problem is knowing the buttons. Why does circle interact with objects and the X button return your cursor to the left corner of the screen? Why is triangle the inventory button, or select the pause menu? The only thing that seems appropriate is the triggers, which increase your cursor move speed. If you didn't know this, you're going to be wasting a lot of time trying to navigate the screen and find clues. So that's when you need the PlayStation mouse. This is an accessory that's considered a rarity amongst PlayStation collectors. To put it bluntly, it's just a basic mouse for the PlayStation with 2 buttons, which does the job surprisingly well. It runs smoothly and I've hit very few problems with it, and I much prefer it to the standard controller. The controls are simple. Use the left click to interact, the right to inspect, and pressing both buttons at the same time brings up the menu. These controls are easy to remember, and the quickness of the cursor makes life so much easier. So fuck that regular controller and stick with the mouse. The reason why the mouse didn't sell all that well was because few games supported it. To name a few that I own, the Broken Sword games supported it, as well as Die Hard Trilogy, Music 2000, Quake 2, and Ghoul Panic. It's amazing how few RTS games used it, the one genre that pretty much requires a mouse. You could ask why the analog stick doesn't come into play, and it's because none of the games supported them at its release, so you had to use the D-pad. Let me tell you, this wears on your thumbs pretty quickly, and after a few hours you'll get blisters. To me, that's a small price to pay for such a fantastic game. Okay, I got really sidetracked there. Let's continue with the gameplay. But in all seriousness, what is there to talk about? Most of the game you'll spend interacting with the environment, clicking objects with the circle button, and seeing what happens. For the most part, objects on the screen are just for show and add a bit more depth to the zone. When you interact with them, you'll get a very descriptive narrative.
The figure of a sexless youth was frozen in mid-skip with a silly grin on its stone lips.
You'll know when you've found something of importance because Stubbar never lets anything go. He'll pick up anything he finds of use in the world.
As I picked up the plastic ball, I realized it was intended to be worn. It was the clown's red nose.
Amongst the bottles of Coca-Cola and a finely crafted glass goblet, there stood the box for the Sony PlayStation mouse. It was useful for some games, but I can't justify keeping it out to gather dust. I'll keep it for now and put it away later. This is Undertaker's gun, Clementine. A fine lady with a gorgeous wooden stock and a strong iron barrel. She's fired more blanks than the Territorials, however. Was that Undertaker? I'll be sure to put it to good use. The man had a curly, greasy black beard and a heart to match. His attire shared the same colour as a midnight sky, and his jewellery was as cheap as dirt. He reeked of raw sewage underneath the mild deodorant. Oi! Will you shut up? I'm trying to read here! But there's one thing that bothers me somewhat. If you find an important clue but don't store it in your inventory, George doesn't make a note of it. Being the amateur detective, I would have thought he'd taken the time to buy a notepad and a biro to jot things down. This is one of those games where if you don't complete it in one sitting, you might as well restart if you forget something. This game does not just consist of pointing, clicking and making progress, it also requires you to solve puzzles and revisit older zones, so if you're just going to click in vain, you won't get anywhere. It's common in point-and-click games to be confused with what you can interact with, and sadly Broken Sword isn't much different. However, there are some things that can help you where other games don't. Take for example the cursor, which changes in different situations. When they turn into spinning cogs, that means you can interact with something. A magnifying glass means you can inspect something, and Stubbar tells you what it is. And finally, a hand means you can change the camera or screen. But even then you'll find something you can interact with nearly every time without inspecting it. This is something you must know early on or you'll be stuck right from the start. Finding objects and notes is only part of the gameplay, as interacting with NPCs plays a gigantic part in solving the mystery. You'll often ask for an alibi or if people recognise an item in your inventory. What's great about this feature is that the dialogue changes depending on what item you use first, but thankfully it doesn't make a game-changing difference. The dialogue exchanges are hilarious, especially with Officer Move early on in the game, and you won't find a single NPC who has nothing of use to say. Even if they don't cooperate at first, progressing through the game may change their mind and give you vital clues. It's not until later in the game where you have to start solving puzzles and do more than just interact with NPCs. Once you discover the plotline about the Knights Templar, you'll be expected to do more with your surroundings, and NPC line of sight will affect your progress. I've little bad to say about this game other than how slow it runs. Not only is there a load of screen for every cutscene when you change the zone, the frame rate is also very choppy each time you interact with an item or NPC. This makes the game almost unbearable to sit through and extends the game's length for the wrong reasons. Also, a journal would be a great help, and I hope to see it in the sequel. We'll review that at some point, but not in this same review. Almost coming to a close, let's end on the visuals and soundtrack. Although the character models are somewhat sketchy, the animations are spectacular and compare well to Heart of Darkness. The environments too are brilliantly designed, and most of the artists were from big animation products, and those who weren't went on to do more professional things. The soundtrack, however, is lacking, but what little music there is I find brilliant. For the most part, the game is silent except for the well-scripted voices, but when a small track plays, it's a real treat for your ears. The final question that remains is how well did the series develop after this game? Shadow of the Templars is usually regarded as the best, often tying with the sequel. Later games were successful, though the reviews weren't nearly as positive as the first games, because the genre was a dying breed. I'll be sure to get round to those at some point, though. It's a shame to know that this game never saw a film release, because it has a great story, combined with likeable characters, action sequences, memorable quotes, and thrills all the way. Shadow of the Templars could have been a blockbuster. So until the next time, I'm the Greasy Game, your #1 source for #2 games. Now if you'll excuse me, Johnbonne, where the hell is my Clementine? The undead mobster was angrier than Joe Vargas playing Rambo the video game. I knew that he wouldn't give up his pursuit for Clementine until I'd given him an answer. It's alright, Undertaker. It's alright. Right here. Come on, John, I ain't waiting forever. Yeah? Well, nor am I, you no-good piece of shit! Oh, God! Despite being snared by the mouse and the cables, I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd recover. I had no choice. Oi, will you shut up? For the last time! Anyway, I'm the Greasy Game, your #1 source for #2 games. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna bury Undertaker again. Ta-ta for now. Okay, you know, I knew I forgot something. The final verdict, here we go. Shadow of the Templars is one of the better adventure games I've played, and considering their popularity at the time, that's no small feat. It brings you likeable characters, meaningful clues and dialogue, lots of cynical humour and gorgeous music, as well as its wonderful world. Unfortunately, the gameplay is brought down by technical issues such as the frame rate drops, freezes, music cutting out, and a lack of tutorial. It's quite a long game, so maybe having it on 2 discs would have cut out some of the problems, but I'm not so sure. Overall, you got a great point-and-click game. If you're new to the genre, don't base your final impressions on it with this single title, whereas if you're experienced, you'll know what to expect. This viewer is a Greasy Gamer must-buy. So until the next time, I'm the Greasy Gamer, your #1 source for #2 games, and yeah, I'm done. See you later.